Now, I want to shift gears here for a moment and talk a bit about First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. For while FDR was drafting his war message, the First Lady was also preparing to speak about Japan's attack. And she would actually be the first Roosevelt to address the shocked nation. Earlier that day, Mrs. Roosevelt had hosted a lunch in the White House's Blue Room. The Pearl Harbor attack began during that lunch, though no one, including the First Lady, was aware of it. After the lunch, Mrs. Roosevelt returned to the White House residence at 2:40 p.m. Observing a commotion outside FDR's study, she realized something grave had occurred. Later that afternoon, when an opportunity presented itself, she visited with her husband. Now, no one understood FDR's personality and moods better than Eleanor Roosevelt. During the 1950s, she recorded her impressions of him when she saw him that fateful afternoon. And I'm going to play a short section of that interview for you. Here is Mrs. Roosevelt describing her husband that afternoon.
I thought him looking very strained and tired, but he was completely calm. His reaction to any great event was always to be calm. If it was something that was bad, he just became almost like an iceberg, and there was never the slightest emotion that was allowed to show. While I was very conscious of his tremendous strain, the first thing I noticed was this deadly calm. And then, almost the first thing he said to me was, with great bitterness and anger, that actually he had hardly finished talking to the Japanese envoys when this was being done in Pearl Harbor. Beyond that, I had a sense that, bad though the news was, and horrible as it was to face, that he was, on the whole, almost relieved to know the worst that had to be faced, and that this country could eventually meet it. And this kind of feeling was something one always expected of him. I have never known him not to be ready to face the worst that could happen, but always to be hopeful about the solution that could be found.